Hi everyone, Liane here. I hope you're doing well. Today I am featuring my top 5 favorite fountain pen inks, and this is to continue the series where in my last video I provided my top 5 favorite fountain pens, and this is something that I want to do every year as I celebrate my YouTube channel birthday month. May is the month in which I started my first where I posted my first YouTube video back in 2022, and I think it'd be really fun for me to identify and highlight my favorite pens and inks every May. So I just went over my supplies list, and in thinking about selecting my favorite inks, I have to say it was so much harder than picking my top 5 fountain pens. I think I definitely have a wider array of fountain pen inks, and it was just really tough. So I know that this list will change probably from month to month, but right now as it stands, these are my top 5 favorites. This first one should come as no surprise to you. This is a Pelikan 4001 Brilliant Brown. And when you look at it, gosh, when I look at it, I get really excited. It's not kind of your deeper, richer browns. It's rich, but it's more like your orange brown. All of these 5 inks that I've selected today are pretty reliable shading inks. And what I love about this ink is that it's dark and saturated enough that it shows up really bright and brilliantly in my extra fine nibs, especially like my Japanese, even my Japanese extra fine nibs, to the bolder, broader nibs. And it's almost like it shows up and has different personalities. The finer the nib, the more orange it gets, and of course the broader the nib, it starts to develop kind of a richer, deeper, like more of a darker brown color. As you could see on this video or in the writing sample, it's just beautiful. It has like a rich shade. It represents lots of different color properties, like when you're looking at the ink cloud swatch. And I would say as the ink swatch dries, there is some black tipping in the darker, more pooled areas. Now this one will definitely not come as a surprise to those of you, especially for those of you who watched my previous, not my previous channel, but my previous video featuring my favorite pens. I have this ink inked up in my TWSBI Eco White and Rose Gold pen, and I mentioned in my last video that this is one of my top 5 favorites. It's one of the first inks that I swatched and played with very early on in my journey, and it continues to be one of my favorites. It is a wet ink. It flows beautifully in every sort of pen that I've inked it in. I have to say though that I have really loved it in the TWSBI White and Eco fountain pen in an extra fine nib. It's beautiful, it's vibrant, but it's also dark enough that it's legible. You can really see it on paper. And I think even if it's in an extra fine nib, you have to see it in a broader nib because it shades beautifully. It's an exceptional shading ink. You know, even as I look at all of my top 5 pen inks or my top 5 favorite inks, I see why I love them because they all shade to varying degrees. I would say Wearingeul Kyeong-Hee probably is one of the best shading inks that I have in my list today. There are some that were going to be like number 3 and 4. Actually, you'll see it here, Diamine Green Umber, where it shades, but it doesn't shade exceptionally as Kyeong-Hee does. What can I say about Diamine Green Umber, except to say that I love that it is kind of a medium, more of an unsaturated green. It's muted. It's almost like that green gray color that I really love, and it really seems to looks exceptional next to these other like fall kind of like colors. I love this ink, especially when I have it paired with my Traveler's Company brass pen. And there's something about that pen, which is one of my top 5 favorite pens. There's something about this ink paired in that pen where I feel so much delight and joy whenever I write with that particular pen and ink pairing. This ink is somewhat of a shading ink as well. I won't say it shades as well as Kyeong-Hee, but I've noticed in my Traveler's Company brass pen in a fine nib, that being a wet writer, there is some subtle shading that I really appreciate. And this ink has a little bit of black tipping in the more pooled areas as well. And by the way, all 5 of these inks have no shimmer. There's no particular sheen in any of them either. They're all pretty lovely standard shading inks. Herbin's Larmes de Cassis. In English, it's translated to like tears of black currant or black currant tears. This ink is in my top 5 exclusively, primarily because this ink is inked and will perpetually be inked in my Sailor Pro Gear Every Rose Has Its Thorn. That was a pen that I bought at Oblation Papers, pre-loved, and that pen was inked with this ink. And it's because of that pen and ink pairing and my writing experience in that shop that I fell in love with that pen and I bought it. And I really don't actually like this ink in any other pen. I only exclusively have it in the Sailor Pro Gear, probably for nostalgia and for the sort of connection that I have to this pen and to this ink together. This is a beautiful, I would say it's like it's probably the brightest color that I have on this page, but it's also subdued in a very lovely muted way. Out of the 5 inks today, this is probably the lowest shading ink. It doesn't have any sort of tipping or sheening in the pooled areas. It looks pretty flat, but still, nonetheless, it's like one of my favorite inks. Last but not least, this is Taccia Benitsuchi. It really was a tie between this ink and Diamine Ancient Copper, and if I did a side-by-side ink comparison, the 2 of them look nearly identical, but for some reason I am preferring this ink over Diamine Ancient Copper. Don't ask me why. It's just one of those gut feelings where I just have loved this ink. I've had it in my extra fine nibs these days, and it shades beautifully. It's not an exceptional or high shading ink, but it has just enough shading that gives it just a nice, lovely, complex look. It's saturated. It does look a lot like Diamine Ancient Copper, and so I just want to highlight 3 viewers who I would say guessed correctly. They all chose 3. They all tied for 3 correct guesses. Tilly T00, Little Coco Studio, and Christine McGregor 9970. They all guessed 3 correctly. Tilly T00 had guessed Pelikan Brown, Something J. Herbin in Ancient Copper. Little Coco Studio had guessed Pelikan Brilliant Brown, Wearingeul Kyeong-Hee, and Ancient Copper. And Christine McGregor 9970 guessed Ancient Copper, Larmes de Cassis, and Wearingeul Kyeong-Hee. I had to give it to them. They all guessed Ancient Copper, and if not for Taccia Benitsuchi, I would have guessed, or I would have picked Ancient Copper. So the 3 of them are great guessers and highly attuned. And as I close out on this video with these close-ups, I hope you enjoyed this video. I would love to hear what your top favorites are, or even from this selection, what your favorites are. Thanks for watching. Take care.